Listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to True Crime, the podcast that helps you find new, emerging, and undiscovered true crime podcasts. I'm Greg, the host and curator of True Crime. Today's episode is from PNW Haunts Homicides. Caitlin and Cassie cover true crime, paranormal, and all things spooky in the Pacific Northwest. If you like today's episode, make sure to check out the episode description for links to subscribe. All right, let's get this show started.
Begin. Welcome to When Darkness Calls, the Halloween collaboration podcast that will leave you trembling in your seat. This year, we have 13 participating podcasts, each covering a different topic related to the dark and the dreadful. Join us on a journey through the forest where the trees whisper secrets and the shadows dance. As we walk, we will introduce each podcast host and share a taste of the terrors that await you. First, we come to the clearing where Nicole from True Crime South Africa sits, her eyes glowing in the moonlight. Nicole is a master of weaving tales of murder and mayhem, and the tales on this podcast will chill you to the bone.
I'm Nicole Engelbrecht from True Crime South Africa, and this is The Fake Pediatrician and the Abandoned Hospital. In the 1980s, Kempton Park Hospital was a hub of state healthcare for local residents. I was actually born in this hospital in September 1980. I could not be happier that I was born in that year, because just 2 years later, a man would appear on the doorstep of Kempton Park Hospital who would leave a very deep scar on its history, and sadly, even ensure that many parents went home without their newborn babies. Just a warning before I get into this case does include instances of injury and death to children due to inadequate medical care. Andre Esterhuizen had already built up a good reputation as a pediatrician in private practice in Kempton Park for 2 years before he started working at Kempton Park Hospital in 1982. Parents of his patients had nothing but good things to say about him. It emerged that the privacy of working in his own rooms had hidden quite a lot about Esterhuizen, though. One fellow doctor at the hospital immediately noticed that Esterhuizen couldn't perform even the simplest of tasks. He would often ask others to do things like insert an intubation tube, something he should have been able to do in his sleep with his amount of experience. This colleague and others would witness multiple examples of this over the years that Esterhuizen worked at Kempton Park Hospital. Sadly, nothing was done about this, with deadly consequences. In 1988, a premature baby seemed to be coping just fine and was breathing on his own after being delivered. The child was placed in a high care unit under Dr. Esterhuizen's care. The child's parents were called later that night, though, and told that the baby had passed away. Esterhuizen claimed he'd only administered drugs to help with what he claimed were underdeveloped lungs. The child had bruising all over its body from failed injection sites. The following year, he misdiagnosed a 10-month-old baby with pneumonia, when she in fact had a severe kidney infection, which ended up claiming her life 11 days later. Case after case presented itself in Kempton Park Hospital. Esterhuizen had attempted a lumbar puncture on a child he'd claimed had meningitis. He was clearly unable to perform the procedure, but continued to attempt it until one doctor remarked it looked as though surgery was being performed on the child with the amount of blood that was present. Another woman woke up from a sedated caesarean section performed by Dr. Esterhuizen to be told that her baby was in an incubator because he was struggling to breathe. Esterhuizen failed to mention that the reason the child was struggling to breathe was because he had stabbed the child with a scalpel while performing the caesarean section. Her child did not survive, and she never saw Esterhuizen again. Another 2 babies were given medication by Esterhazen that was intended for use in adults only. Even after the first child passed away, and a nurse mentioned to Esterhazen that she'd never seen that medication used on babies before, he insisted he had used it successfully on many occasions and proceeded to use it with another child. Both children died shortly after from bleeding on the brain. Kempton Park Hospital had been so taken, hook, line and sinker by Andre Esterhazen that they promoted him in 1989 to head of the emergency care unit. Most doctors at the hospital didn't understand what a pediatrician could possibly have to add to emergency medicine, and the raised eyebrows soon turned into whispers. Esterhazen did not take the criticism well, and in an attempt to drum up some sympathy, told a colleague he'd dealt with this kind of jealousy before. He claimed someone else had reported him to the Health Professionals Council. This comment got that doctor thinking, and he contacted the council himself. The council, though, who has records of every registered health professional in South Africa, had never heard of Andre Esterhazen. Soon, the entire sordid tale unravelled, and hospital administrators realised that they had a scammer working on their staff for almost a decade. In that time, Esterhazen had earned close to 3 million rand and seen over 4,500 patients. But the man himself was not sticking around to face the consequences. Within just a few days of his suspension for investigation, he skipped the country and fled to the US. Soon, though, he had no choice but to come back to South Africa, and he was arrested and tried for a huge number of fraud charges, culpable homicide, and related charges. Esterhazen hadn't even finished high school. Everything he knew about medicine was from textbooks he'd read, and time he'd spent working in laboratories where he'd also faked a PhD in microbiology. In 1992, Esterhazen was eventually found guilty of 3 charges of culpable homicide and several fraud charges, including impersonating a doctor. He was handed down an 18-year sentence. The parents of the children who died or who were permanently injured under his care did not feel that this was nearly enough time for what he'd done. And to be honest, I don't think so either. The staff at Kempton Park Hospital tried to move on from what had happened, but nothing was the same ever again. Whether or not the fake doctor's deeds left a dark cloud over the hospital is debatable, but certainly the memory of the babies, who likely would have lived had they not encountered a fake doctor, would never ever fade. In 1996, the hospital stopped accepting patients, and on the day after Christmas that same year, residents of Kempton Park read in newspapers that the hospital had quite suddenly been closed. Various reasons were bandied about, from a shortage of staff to a shortage of patients. But one day, the hospital was filled with a buzz of people, and the next, it was empty. Bizarrely, all of the medical equipment remained behind, 10 million rands worth at that time. Medicines stayed in the fridges and cupboards. Clipboards lay exactly where they were placed the last time they were set down by nurses. It was as though the hospital had just gone into a time vacuum. Over the years, although local governments had promised time and again that the hospital would be reopened, it never has been. Instead, it's become a place for ghost hunters to seek thrills. Security guards are passed a few rand to look the other way, and those with an interest in the supernatural pick through the dark hallways. At one point, the high-tech equipment was removed and sent to another hospital, but the beds, incubators, and much of the bulkier equipment remains. As one person put it, you could still perform surgery in that hospital. All you would need is a body. People have found a wide range of bizarre and creepy things at the hospital, from organ specimens in jars to autopsy tables, still stained with blood. In 1999, Andre Esterhazen was released from prison on parole after serving just 7 years. He had qualified, with actual proof thereof this time, as an IT technician while he was in prison, and moved to a town in the Free State. In 2022, local governments announced that Kempton Park Hospital is to be demolished, and a new medical facility will be built on its grounds. Perhaps then, the ghosts of its sad and tragic past will finally be put to rest.
Next, we pass by the old oak tree where Elise, from True Crime Cat Lawyer, stands. Her voice as cold as ice. She specializes in unsolved murders from the Pacific Northwest, and the investigations on her podcast will lead you down dark and twisted paths.
Welcome to True Crime Cat Lawyer. I'm your host, Elise, and sometimes my cat Winston joins me. This podcast contains content of a graphic nature that might not be suitable for all listeners, including descriptions of violence, sexual assault, and crimes against animals and children. Listener discretion is advised. This episode is part spooky, part true crime. And I say that because there's definitely some spooky-ish vibes to the story, but it's also at its core a true crime story. So this is the Lady of the Lake. So the lake that we're talking about is Lake Crescent, which is the second largest lake in the state of Washington, and it's located on the Olympic Peninsula. The lake is about 1,600 feet deep and about 12 miles wide. And the lake itself is the source of a lot of haunting talk and death talk and true crime talk. Supposedly, there's a lot of bodies buried here. For example, it's thought that Israel Keys dumped a lot of bodies in the lake. It's definitely a well-known lake in the true crime world. Our story starts with Hallie Illingworth. She was a young woman who was originally born in Kentucky, but she lived all over the United States. In 1936, she started waitressing at the Lake Crescent Lodge, which was about 30 minutes from her apartment in Port Angeles. By 1936, she was 35 and she'd been divorced twice. Most of the articles I read called her, quote unquote, unlucky in love. It seemed like she definitely attracted the wrong kind of guy and she tended to fall in love with the wrong kind of person. Unfortunately, that was no different when she met Montgomery Illingworth, who goes by Monty. They fell in love. He was a local beer truck driver who frequented her waitressing establishment, the Lake Crescent Lodge. He was charming and he sort of swept her off her feet. So they quickly got married, like within weeks or just a few months of meeting, they're already tying the knot. After they get married, Monty becomes really abusive to Hallie. She shows up in work covered in bruises. She has broken teeth and black eyes. Basically, it's a really bad relationship. Police were actually called to break up a fight between the two. One night, it was like the early morning hours while they were both at the lodge, and it got so bad that the police were called. They had to break up the fight, but the two still stayed together despite this. So about 5 months after Hallie and Monty got married, Hallie went missing right before Christmas. By all accounts, when the reports started coming in, police narrowed it down to Hallie last being seen on December 21st or December 22nd. Monty told everyone that she left with another man, although there was no real evidence of that. That's just kind of what he told people. Police thought it was really odd and suspicious that he didn't report Hallie missing. And of course, because of their tumultuous and abusive relationship, police really kind of zeroed in on Monty as a suspect in his wife's disappearance. Police try to track down Hallie's family. They're trying to track down her friends, and they couldn't come up with anybody that had any kind of contact with her after December 22nd. So when police interview Monty, he says he attended a party in Port Townsend, and he said they got into a fight after he came back from the party. Monty then left for a little while, and when he came back, Hallie was gone, and then he says he never saw her again after that. Police asked him about their relationship. Monty's trying to tell them she went off with this Alaskan sailor. Unfortunately, there was no real evidence to connect Monty to doing anything, and Hallie just seemed to have disappeared. They had no body, no witnesses, no crime scene, nothing to point them in the direction of where Hallie was or that Monty had anything to do with it. But of course, Monty wasn't doing himself any favors because he left Port Angeles with a woman named Eleanor Pearson, who was a timber heiress, and they went to California. Supposedly, there were rumors that Monty and Eleanor were actually together before Hallie disappeared, but of course, that couldn't be confirmed. Hallie's case just sat for a while, unfortunately. Police had no leads. They had no idea where Hallie could have gone. They didn't believe the story about her running off with a man, but at the same time, they didn't have any other theories to go off of. And Monty had gone to California, and he was no longer cooperating with the investigation. So everything just kind of went cold and went silent. That is until July 6, 1940. A body was found floating on the surface of Lake Crescent by two fishermen. The upper part of the face, upper lip, and nose were gone, and the tips of the fingers were gone, so they couldn't get any fingerprints. But there was something really unusual about this body. Quote, "The lake's near freezing temperatures had virtually refrigerated the corpse for years," end quote. So everything I read describes this process as saponification, and this is a soap-like condition that results from minerals in the lake interacting with the fats in the body. The skin was extremely well preserved, and it was kind of waxy. The body was similar to soap rather than decomposition that you would normally see. According to experts, saponification occurred because the cold prevented decomposition as the salt in the water penetrated the tissue.
You're listening to an episode of PNW Haunts and Homicides on True Crime by Indie Drop-In. We're going to take a quick break. And now back to this episode of PNW Haunts and Homicides.
So now police have this body, but at first they had no idea who it was. They have no fingerprints, and the body is missing parts of it. So eventually they are able to track down who this is because of a bridge in the body. Hallie had a distinctive dental bridge, and that was used to identify her. They were able to track down her dentist, who identified her through that means, and they were able to confirm that this body was in fact Hallie Illingworth. So now that they know that it's Hallie, they want to figure out, okay, how did she die? How did she end up in the lake? Hallie's body was wrapped in blankets, and it was tied with a rope. It was pretty much perfectly preserved other than the tips of body parts that were missing. A medical student named Harlan McNutt was brought in to examine Hallie's body and basically perform the autopsy. Harlan McNutt, as he's performing this autopsy, says that Hallie had been strangled and beaten. She had been strangled and beaten. Her neck was bruised and discolored. The chest showed evidence of extensive hemorrhaging. When police find this out, they immediately suspect foul play because these don't seem like the kinds of injuries that are self-inflicted. These don't seem like the kind of injuries someone would get if they fell overboard off of a boat or drowned. When Hallie's body was identified, Monty was living in Long Beach, California. In October of 1941, police arrest Monty, they charge him with murder, and they bring him back to Port Angeles to stand trial for Hallie's murder. Monty's trial began on February 24th, 1942. The courtroom was packed with spectators. People attended this trial all 9 days that it was held. Monty's defense was essentially that this woman's body that they found wasn't Hallie. Hallie was alive the last time he saw her. There was no evidence to suggest otherwise. That was his whole defense. Monty also testified at trial in his own defense, and he claims that him and Hallie would get into striking matches, but he denied ever beating her and he denied killing her. Well, the prosecution obviously thought they had a pretty good case against him. So they had the dentist testify about the ID, and he came across as a very credible witness. They had Hallie's friends identify the clothing found on the body as Hallie's, and they also presented key evidence, which was the rope that was used to bind Hallie. Monty had borrowed about 50 feet of rope from a storekeeper at the lake, and the fibers from that rope matched the fibers found on Hallie's body. Another point that the prosecution brought up is that Monty had asked for a divorce shortly after Hallie went missing, which again, the police thought was really odd. So in March of 1942, jurors deliberate for about 4 hours before handing down their verdict. The jury finds Monty guilty of second-degree murder and sentences him to life in prison at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. Unfortunately, Monty only served 9 years before he was paroled. He later died in November 1974 in Los Alamitos, California. Hallie's body was the first ever to be found floating in Lake Crescent. Her story gets so much attention because of the saponification process that occurred and essentially preserved her body and turned it into wax. It's just something that's not seen very often, and it definitely gives this case a little bit of that spooky vibe on top of the true crime. Quote, "It was said that Lake Crescent never gave up its dead until the Lady of the Lake surfaced in 1940. End quote.
As we move further into the darkness, we hear the sound of laughter echoing through the trees. It is the laughter of Richard from Private Dick's podcast, who, along with some friends, delights in telling tales of the unsolved and the supernatural, with a twist of that wicked laughter thrown in.
Hi, my name's Richard from Private Dick's podcast. Today, we're going to solve a mystery from my favorite holiday, Halloween. And I'll pepper in some true crime that I feel is relevant to the mystery. Now, I love Halloween. I love the spooky movies, the candy, just the pageantry of the whole thing. I think it's a wonderful time of the year. I love trick-or-treating as a kid. What an odd thing we send our kids out to do at Halloween. Go from door to door asking strangers for candy, using that saying, trick or treat. Now, why do we say trick or treat? That's the mini mystery we're going to solve today. Believe it or not, originally, trick or treat was meant as a threat. Europeans in medieval times celebrated Samhain, which was on October 31st. Samhain marked the end of harvest season and the beginning of the darker half of the year. The veil between this world and the other world thinned, meaning ghosts or fairies could enter this world more easily. And it just generally got spookier during this time of year, being darker, colder, just scarier. So with the season change, this time of year has always been associated with the supernatural. Now, by the year 993, the Christian Church implemented All Souls Day, a day to celebrate and honor their dead ancestors. With All Souls Day came the practice of souling. On All Souls Day, people would bake these little cakes that they called soul cakes, or souls for short. The souls were then given to kids and the poor who would go door to door begging for souls. Now, in exchange for these souls, the recipient would promise to sing prayers for the dead whom they thought were still stuck in purgatory. This was called souling. Then the tradition of guising was invented in 16th century Scotland. Much like souling, kids would go door to door asking for food from their neighbors. The reason it was called guising is because the kids would be wearing a disguise while doing it. As the kids approached each house in their masks, they would be reciting rhymes and often threatening to do mischief if they are not welcomed. With the large influx of Irish and Scottish escaping the potato famine to America in the 1800s, they brought their traditions with them. In America, kids were already doing pranks on Halloween night. This time of year is when the spirits were out and the kids could get away with more pranks. Just blame the spirits for your fence door being stolen or the fact that the barn door opened up in the middle of the night. I don't know why all the pranks I could think of involved doors, but here we are. Adults started to notice that if they gave kids candy in the evening, there would be less and less harassment and vandalism at night. And eventually, the kids knew the adults' plan and were cool with it. To a kid, candy is as good as cash, if not better. So slowly throughout Halloween in the 1900s, kids started going door to door, not asking for soul cakes anymore, but asking for candy. But like guising, it was like a threat. They'd say, treat up or tricks, meaning if you don't give us treats, expect some tricks. Tricks could have been anything nefarious. Like I said earlier, any door type crime where you steal a door, take a door off the hinges, open doors. I'm just kidding. It could have been anything. Nowadays, it's kind of the same rule. When I was a kid, if you didn't give us candy on Halloween, we probably would have toilet papered your yard, or maybe even egged your house or your car or something. We couldn't do the egging too much because it was hard to get eggs in my small town. So many people used to get egged that the grocery stores wouldn't sell eggs to kids for the 2 weeks leading up to Halloween. I know egging someone's house is an asshole move to do, but whatever. We were 13. We were assholes. It's just what it is. And it was just the spirits making us do it anyway. So who cares? And from there, trick-or-treating became mainstream and less menacing until what it is today. Now, it seems as you get older, the treats become less fun and the tricks become the fun on Halloween. I stopped egging stuff around the age of 13, but I knew guys when I was 16 or 17 that didn't even trick-or-treat anymore. They just went out around midnight and egged their enemy's house. It's better than fist fighting your enemy, I guess, or shooting them. All I know is that as an adult, if my house was egged, I'd be extra pissed and I'd try to find the little bastards that did it. And if I caught the little bastards in the act, I'd probably chase them, probably with a bat. And that seems like a reasonable response. But sometimes reasonable responses aren't the correct response. And that's not fair, but neither is trick or treat. Why do I have to do anything, you little extortionist? Sometimes you just got to let it go. And I think that's what the parents did when trick-or-treating first kind of started. They said, oh, we'll just give them candies. It's better than getting all of our stuff broken, all of our doors taken off their hinges. So now let me introduce you to a guy named Carl Jackson. He went to school at Our Savior Lutheran in the Bronx in the 90s. As a teenager, Carl hated Halloween because his neighborhood was dangerous. It was the Bronx in the 90s, and I'm sure there's a bunch of gang activity. So Carl grows up, gets through high school, and by the time he is 21, he is a computer programmer at Morgan Stanley, the giant investment firm. Now, some of the articles say computer programmer, others say he was a data entry clerk. And I'm going to say at 21, he might have been a computer programmer, but it's more likely a nicer way of saying data entry clerk, because data entry clerk is a boring job, less interesting sounding anyway. On October 31st, 1998, the 21-year-old Carl, his 29-year-old girlfriend, Darlene, are in the car driving to go pick up her 9-year-old son, Clyde. Clyde was at a Halloween party near Gun Hill Road in the Bronx. Now, I feel like if you want safer streets, you rename the street Gun Hill Road, but that's just me. Clyde and his pals were having a great time bopping for apples, eating candy, and listening to spooky music. Carl and Darlene were actually just picking up Clyde to drop him off at his babysitter's house for the night. Darlene was excited that her and Carl could go out to a Halloween party with their adult friends this year. Carl didn't really like Halloween, like I'd said earlier, but Darlene wanted to go out, so Carl figured, why not? And as they're driving, all of a sudden, bam! An egg hits the windshield of his car as he's driving. Motherfucking kids, Carl exclaims as he slams the brakes while pulling over to the side of the road. Carl gets out of his car and walks quickly towards the kids, yelling and shouting. Darlene is sitting in the passenger seat. Don't do anything, Carl. They're just stupid kids. Get back in the car. Carl still walks, all while inside her head thinking, yeah, Carl, talk about sexy. You tell those teenagers where to go. Carl yells at them, silence for a few seconds, and door opens. Carl gets back in the car. Carl, you didn't have to do that. As her hand grabs his thigh. Now, there's two ways the story is reported. Both ways end the same. The first one is as reported by the New York Times in 1998. Also exaggerated for color by me. Let's just get that in there. Here's how it's first reported. After the thigh grab is a Richard exaggeration, not the New York Times, just so everyone knows. Carl, you didn't have to do that. As her hands grab his thigh. Fuck those kids, he thinks as he drives away, even though he was their age not that long ago. When he drives away, Curtis Sterling, one of the cool Halloween egger tricksters, gets in a car, pursues him, then shoots him in the head. That's the info. Like, did he pull up beside them? Were they getting run off the road? What happened here? Stoplight? Anyways, that's all the reporting I get on that. So that's story number one. And the second way it's reported, it's another New York Times article, but this time from 2010, and it's reported a little differently. So after the thigh grab, remember that's a Richard exaggeration for color. Carl, you didn't have to do that, as her hand grabs his thigh. Curtis Sterling followed Carl to the car. Then Sterling runs up to the car, places the barrel of the gun to Carl's temple, and pulls the trigger, killing Carl instantly. Either way, ends the same. Carl was dead, family traumatized. Curtis Sterling ran. He was terrified. He just killed a man. Curtis decides that if the cops don't have a murder weapon, they can't charge him with murder. So Curtis decides to sell the gun. Turns out the guy that he found to sell the weapon to was an undercover police officer. Sterling was arrested and charged with murder. Curtis Sterling got 20 years in jail. Carl's family was and still is devastated, I'm sure. Each Halloween, they go to Carl's grave at the Woodland Cemetery in the Bronx for a visit. Various members of Carl's family leave him messages painted on stones they leave at his grave. Another tradition, Gloria, Carl's mother, has for Halloween is sending Curtis Sterling a Halloween card in jail. Inside it always reads, "I'm glad you're still there." Now, assuming that Sterling's court case was finished by 2000 and he did his entire sentence without getting any extra time added for doing dumb shit in jail, Sterling would be out now. And that's the tale of Carl Jackson. Sometimes you just got to let it go. Doing the right thing or doing the reasonable thing sometimes isn't the reasonable answer. So I say on Halloween this year, to avoid getting egged, give the kids all the best candy in town, full-size chocolate bars, pops, stuff like that. Keep your house from getting egged. And if you do get egged because you decide not to participate, just let it go, because there could be a Curtis Sterling waiting for you. Happy Halloween, everyone.
We continue our journey deeper into the forest, where the air is thick with the scent of decay. Here we find Allison from Coffee and Cases podcast, huddled around a campfire. She is a connoisseur of all things creepy, unsolved murder, mysterious disappearances, and the paranormal. And the stories shared on her podcast will often have you looking over your shoulder, as you should be right now. Hello from Coffee and Cases True Crime Podcast, where we like our coffee hot and our cases cold. Allison here. I'm by myself this go-round as my co-host is on maternity leave. But even though I'm temporarily a one-woman show, you can still check out new episodes of our podcast every Thursday on your favorite podcasting app to hear coverage of many lesser-known cases that are screaming for justice, just like this one that I have for you today. Now, let's dive into this case. Sylvia Salinas, born January 7th, 1959, was one of the 4 children of Derlis Salinas Sr. and Maria Elena Salinas. Her parents, from La Hacienda de Guadalupe, Mexico, decided to move to Galveston, Texas to raise their children. The religious Catholic family attended regular Mass and became an integral part of their local community when Sylvia's brother, Derlis Jr., purchased the small grocery store at the corner of 31st Street and Avenue Q. Her brother ran the store for nearly 2 decades before making the decision to open another grocery store, but this one in Hawaii. He transferred ownership of the store in Galveston to his parents. From there, in 1988, Sylvia officially purchased the store. Everyone in the neighborhood already knew her from working at the store for years prior, and they loved her, calling her Aunt Sil or Tia Sil. An old roommate of Sylvia's, Cynthia Marsh, noted how kind Sylvia Salinas was to any and all in the neighborhood, and that she would listen to people's problems. Those she was close to, she would even invite behind the counter to keep her company there. She would advance store credit against future paychecks for those who needed food before they were paid. She had their backs. But she was also on alert at all times. Marsh said in an article for Galveston Daily News, quote, "That store was her life. She was a very alert person in running her business. She'd been doing it for 10 years. and she was a person who was alert to danger. She could tell when people who came into her store were a threat, end quote. You see, while Sylvia was a person who believed in the good in people, she was also perceptive and knew that even though she trusted others, it was possible that she may need to protect herself and her profits in the store. So she kept both a pistol and a machete at the register. Despite the joy that Sylvia got from interacting with others in the neighborhood, courtesy of her position in the store, running it was a lot of work. And Sylvia had already made the hard decision to not renew the store's lease of the building it was in when it came due in 1990. Instead, she decided that she would like to follow in her brother Derlis Jr.'s footsteps and move to Hawaii. Who could blame her? But she never got the opportunity to share memories in the sand and surf with her brother. On October 31st, 1989, 30-year-old Sylvia Salinas' parents had just left her to go home for lunch. Sylvia was staying behind at the store to restock the shelves. At 1:23 p.m., the Galveston Police Department received notification that a silent alarm had been triggered at Salinas' food store, meaning there was a robbery in progress, since the silent alarm was linked to the cash register. Within 4 minutes, by 1:27 p.m., 2 officers, John Lopez and Carol Ivy, arrived on scene to find Sylvia Salinas murdered, and the cash register pried open. In the police report, officers wrote, quote, "The victim was obviously dead. No defensive-type wounds are present on the decedent's forearms, wrists, or hands. There is one stab wound above the left breast," end quote. The knife had pierced her heart and a lung. Officers knew what had caused the wound, as there on the counter near Sylvia's body was the murder weapon, described as a 9 to 10-inch butcher knife. To me, however, it looks like the curvature of a filleting knife. And I know this because in the hours after law enforcement first arrived, Sergeant James Kitchen got to the store, equipped with a video camera to tape the scene. He captured Sylvia's body by the stool on which she had been seated. He honed in on the knife on the counter. He focused on the bloody shoe prints on the floor of the store. While there, police collected fingerprints and also noted blood on the pried open cash register, leading them to believe that the perpetrator had killed Sylvia and then used the same knife to pry open the cash register. While coins and food stamps remained in the register, all of the paper money had been taken. Everyone in the community was in shock at Sylvia's untimely death. Hers was a loss felt by all. Cynthia Marsh said of Sylvia's death, quote, "Whoever killed her didn't just kill her. They killed a part of everyone who knew her," end quote.
You're listening to an episode of PNW Haunts and Homicides on True Crime by Indie Drop-In. We're going to take a quick break. And now back to this episode of PNW Haunts and Homicides.
But also causing shockwaves was the fact that it didn't seem as though anyone saw anything suspicious. Or at least if they did, they weren't talking about it. In total, 20 people were interviewed by police, but no suspects were named. Witnesses reported 4 different men at or around the time Sylvia had been murdered being around the Salinas food store. Some witnesses reported seeing 2 men enter the store around the time of the murder. Other witnesses reported an African-American man in dark clothing using a payphone outside the store, who, if not involved himself, may have seen something. Still, other witnesses reported a Caucasian man with sandy blonde or brown hair running down the alley beside the food store, again who, if not involved himself, may have seen something. None of the 4 men have ever been identified. But that fact didn't jive with friend Cynthia Marsh, who told Galveston reporters for an article on November 6th, 1989, quote, "When this happened, it was a busy time. It was lunchtime. People were always going in and out. There was always activity around Salinas Grocery. People were always going in and out. The neighborhood is a kind of open neighborhood. Someone is always watching. People sit on their porches. It's hard for me to believe at that time of day that no one saw anything. There has to be someone out there who saw something," end quote. She went on to note later in that same article that Sylvia had developed many new friendships of late with individuals who lived in Houston. The fact that Cynthia Marsh gives a call to action for them to come forward to provide information to detectives on who may have killed Sylvia leads me to believe that it's Marsh's opinion that the perpetrator might not be a Galveston native. What most close to Sylvia do agree on, including law enforcement, is that Sylvia Salinas knew her killer. You see, based on the crime scene, it was clear that Sylvia had been seated on a stool behind the counter when she had been stabbed. This meant that the killer wasn't someone she was on alert about as a threat, or else she wouldn't have been seated. It was someone standing close to her. This was a knife wound, after all, and not a gunshot. And recall that she only invited those very close to her and those she trusted behind the counter with her. There were no defensive wounds, which shows that there was no struggle and that she likely didn't see the attack coming. Couple all of that with the fact that Sylvia had not triggered the store's alarm system, nor had she reached for her machete, nor her pistol. The only reason the alarm had gone off was because after the perpetrator killed Sylvia, they pried open the cash register and had tripped the silent alarm themselves. Over the years, police have wondered whether the motive were robbery and Sylvia was a casualty of that theft, or whether the motive was murder and the robbery were an afterthought. I know with money gone, it may seem more logical to believe that robbery was the motive, but I'm not so convinced. You see, I would imagine that if robbery were the motive, a very different crime from murder, they would have first demanded the money or for the drawer to be opened. And if either of those had happened, Sylvia would have been aware of entering into a dangerous situation, would have fought with the person, would have attempted to trigger the alarm, or would have at least attempted to grab for a weapon. But none of those things happened. The murder happened first. Then, and only then, was the bloodied knife used to pry open the register for the money. Sadly, much of the evidence in Sylvia's case was destroyed during Hurricane Ike. However, just recently it was discovered that the videotape of the crime scene, the murder weapon itself, and the fingerprints collected from the scene are still available. That much, at least, gives us hope that answers are still possible, that in time, the Salinas family may believe in goodness again, if someone were to come forward with information. You see, on November 5th, 1989, Brother Durless Jr. told the Galveston Daily News, quote, "Sylvia was a very loving girl and a naive girl, too. She wanted to believe in people. She died believing that people are basically good. She would never suspect anyone would hurt her," end quote. We need to push for answers in Sylvia's case, tell her story, and show her brother that there are still good people out there willing to help fight for justice. Recently, Sylvia's niece, Christine Taylor, has taken up the fight in finding answers by contacting local news stations to keep her aunt's story alive. You see, even if we don't have information to share, we can all do our small part by sharing stories like this one. Maybe that'll be what it takes for someone who does have information to know that there are still people who won't rest until Sylvia's case is solved. Anyone with information is asked to call Galveston Crime Stoppers at 409-763-8477. You may remain anonymous. We reach a fork in the path, and to our left, we see the ruins of an abandoned castle. Within its walls, Brooke and Ashley dwell, their voices raspy and otherworldly. They are masters of true crime horrors from the podcast Teachers Talk Crime, and their stories will take you to places where nightmares are born to show that evil exists everywhere, even in schools.
I'm Ashley.
And I'm Brooke.
And you're here with us on A Teachers Who Talk Crime.
podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. If you don't know us, we are Teachers Talk Crime. We are a podcast that focus on crimes committed by adolescents, and when necessary, we include our teacher backgrounds and give you our takes on some things.
Yeah, about the education system and maybe some things that we've experienced in the classrooms, maybe some suggestions on how the system could be better, what is the system doing right, etc., etc. So if you would like to hear more, you can stream us on all platforms, Teachers Talk Crime. And we're also on social media. We're on YouTube under Teachers Talk Crime. And we're also on Instagram at Teachers Talk Crime.
Yep, so everything's just Teachers Talk Crime.
Yeah. So we hope you enjoy this, and we're going to get straight into the case. And we hope you are a new listener / follower by the end of it. Sit down, shut up. The murder is about to begin.
Ahora. Please note that this lesson contains disturbing content primarily involving murder. Previously on Teachers Talk Crime, we delve into the chilling and tragic event that occurred on January 13th, 1998 in Linwood, California. The participants of this story are 37-year-old Gina Castillo, her 16-year-old son, Mario Padilla, and her 14-year-old nephew, Samuel Ramirez. The chain of events leading to this horrific incident began with a simple request from Gina to her son Mario. She asked him to complete some household chores, and it seems that Mario had been grounded as a form of punishment, likely for failing to complete these tasks. This grounding did not sit well with Mario, and he became increasingly resentful. As tensions escalated, Mario confided in Samuel, and together they reached a shocking agreement. They decided to murder Gina. This swift and drastic decision is deeply unsettling, and it begs the question of what drove them to such a horrifying choice. The answer lies in their obsession with the Scream movies, particularly Scream and Scream 2.
So if you wanted to know how this was going to relate to Halloween, we all love some spooky movies, but these
Not
two
me.
took it a little too far, using the Scream franchise as their inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
And no. Thank you. No, thank you.
Nope, just watch it, don't do it, okay?
Yeah.
Both boys were captivated by these films, considering them cool. However, their fascination went far beyond mere admiration. They began discussing these movies as if they were a blueprint for real-life killings. One of them even expressed that the movie's murders were the perfect way to kill somebody. Unfortunately, no one took their words seriously enough to report them, emphasizing the importance of speaking up when someone talks about harming others. Their obsession with the Scream movies ran so deep that they planned to buy the Ghostface costumes and voice distortion devices to emulate the movie while committing real murders. Witnesses would later recall hearing the boys referring to their fantasies as doing a scream or busting a scream, using disturbing terminology that should have raised alarm bells.
And as we know now, the Scream franchise, when it got brought up in court, they don't take any accountability for this. None whatsoever. Because it should not be known that a movie should have a disclaimer. Hey, don't actually go do these things.
It's like common courtesy.
Yeah.
Returning to that fateful day of January 13th, 1998, Mario and Samuel brutally attacked Gina. Mario approached her from behind while Samuel held her down. The attack resulted in Gina being stabbed a horrifying 45 times, using at least 4 different knives. Lacking the funds for the Scream costumes, the boys resorted to pulling their shirts over their heads as disguises while committing this heinous act. Remarkably, even after sustaining 45 stab wounds, Gina managed to call 911 for help and reached out to her husband, Pedro Castillo, who was Mario's stepfather. Mario and Samuel also stole money, either $140 or $150, from Gina, funds originally intended as a baptism gift for Gina's 1-month-old daughter. After the assault, the boys callously watched Gina die from outside her apartment, likely through a window. Tragically, Gina was found dead in her 2-bedroom apartment on the same day she was murdered. While it is not clear how the boys were apprehended, they were arrested immediately and confessed to stabbing and robbing Gina. Their confessions revealed that they were influenced by the Scream movies and intended to make threatening calls to their fellow high school students. However, during the trial, Compton's Superior Court Judge John Cherosky made a controversial decision to ban any mention of the Scream movies. He also prohibited the case from being referred to as the Scream murder case. This decision worried Deputy District Attorney Carol Rose, who believed that the removal of all references to the movie would weaken her case, even though the films played a pivotal role in the boys' motivations. Despite Mario's public defender, Paul Golub, claiming that Mario suffered from mental illness and was unfit for trial, Judge Cherosky refused to place him in a psychiatric clinic. Cherosky argued that the murder displayed careful planning and sophistication, making Mario a threat to society. During the trial, it was revealed that Mario and Samuel had not only planned to kill Gina, but also Mario's stepfather, Pedro Castillo, as well as 2 other girls from the area who received threatening letters and phone calls. Fortunately, Pedro was spared because he was at work during the murder. The boys even invited a friend named Aaron Hernandez to join in the killing, but he declined their horrifying invitation. Pedro Castillo, despite raising Mario for 10 years, did not attend his stepson's week-long trial. He wanted no further contact with Mario, and Carol Rose later delivered the verdict to him. Mario Padillo was found guilty as an adult and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Samuel was sentenced to 25 years to life because he was 14 at the time of the murder, and therefore could not receive a life sentence without parole. As of May 2022, there was a significant update regarding Mario's case. The California Supreme Court ruled that his case would be sent back for a transfer hearing, where a juvenile court judge would assess various factors, including Mario's maturity, criminal history, and potential rehabilitation. To hear the full episode of this case, search Teachers Talk Crime on your favorite podcast platform and listen to episode 61 titled The Scream Murder.
Thank you, and happy Halloween.
Bye.
Bye.
We continue our walk, and the forest grows darker and more ominous. We can hear the sound of something moving in the bushes, but we cannot see what it is. Suddenly, we come upon a clearing, and in the center of the clearing stands Leroy Luna. His eyes are black as night, and his smile is wicked. Leroy is the host of Excuse Me, That's Illegal, and he invites you to join him on a journey into the heart of the ominous and the hysterical.
What's up, everybody? Leroy here. I specialize in telling tales of what I like to call softcore crime. You know, petty criminal shit. And while I don't dive into the worst of the worst week in and week out like you're probably accustomed to, that doesn't mean I don't come across my fair share of creeps. Peeps you need to be wary of. That the youngins, our children, our nieces, our nephews, our neighbors need to be wary of. Especially around the holidays. It really is true when they say, crime doesn't take a vacation. That is a saying, right? Is Halloween even considered a holiday? Oh man, now you got me overthinking it. Anyway, I've assembled a few short cautionary tales for you that I've come across in my travels, so you know the potential dangers to look out for as the Halloween season approaches. Our first incident takes place in Maryland, specifically Anne Arundel County. This was last year, back in 2022. It's Halloween night, around 7:30 p.m. So you know, the festivities are in full swing when police receive a call about a 45-year-old woman displaying some disturbing behavior at her home. Wendy Kachorik, my apologies, Wendy, if I just butchered your last name there, is handing out candy. And wait for it, whilst screaming obscenities and exposing herself to the children who come to her door. Talk about getting a trick and a treat. Wow. Inappropriate to say the least. And this is why I don't let my sons go trick-or-treating alone. I'd hate to miss out on something like this. I can't help but think if there were some teens out there, they'd be slapping each other high fives, being all like, yo, you gotta go to that lady's place on the corner, man. Why, is she like handing out cans of pop or full-size chocolate bars or something? Nah, man, it's even better than that. Trust me, bro. All kidding aside, this is some predatory behavior, or at the very least, this lady is severely mentally unstable. Wendy was hit with disorderly conduct and indecent exposure charges. Unreal. Moving on to incident number 2. I told you these would be shorties. I don't have much time over here. Let's travel back to 2012 for this one and go across the pond to the town of Oldham, which is in Greater Manchester, England. We got police constable Simon Fowle, and he's taking his kids trick-or-treating. The off-duty officer has 3 children with him. They are 8, 6, and 5 years of age, so quite the handful. The rambunctious kiddos excitedly ring their last doorbell of the evening. It's been a long night for Officer Simon, no doubt, and he wants to get him home, maybe fix himself a drink. They probably should have ended their evening a little earlier, as they could have avoided some trouble here. 23-year-old Donald Jr. Green stumbles to the door. This man likes to party, and he's at his girlfriend's home. They've been handing out little packages of those Haribo sweets, delicious candies. I love the gummy bears or those little sody pops. Anyway, Donald, who is already pretty high, well, he reaches into his pocket, grabs a few packets, and gives them to the trick-or-treaters. They say their thank yous and leave. A couple minutes later, Donald thinks to himself, time to get high. He grabbed himself 200 pounds worth of cocaine earlier that day. 200 pounds as in $200 worth. We're in England here. I'm not talking about the weight. 200 pounds of cocaine would be worth millions on the streets. Donald doesn't work for the cartel. He just uses the coke recreationally. He likes the smell.
You're listening to an episode of PNW Haunts and Homicides on True Crime by Indie Drop-In. We're going to take a quick break. And now back to this episode of PNW Haunts and Homicides.
So he reaches back into his pocket and pulls out, shit. All he's got are these damn Haribo candies. Wait a minute. Nah, he couldn't be that stupid. Yep, he is. Our boy just accidentally distributed 3 little baggies of cocaine into the baggies of those sweet little children instead of the sweets. Crap. He panics and rushes outside to try and find the kids to fix his mistake, but they are nowhere to be found. Remember, I said this was their last house of the evening, so let's check in on the Fowle family who are already in their home. They have scattered their candy on the floor. They're checking out their haul from the evening, as kids do. Officer Simon is with them looking for potential dangers, razor blades and the like, when he spots a little baggie of what looks to be cocaine. He's a cop after all. He knows a baggie of drugs when he sees them. He yoinks all 3 baggies off the floor and asks his eldest child, do you remember who gave you this? She goes, yeah, mate. We got those over at the very last house. Strange, isn't it? The officer calls his on-duty buddies, informs them of the situation, and they pay Donald a visit. When they get to his door, poor Donnie answers and says, quote, I know exactly why you're here. I knew you were coming, end quote. The officers promptly arrested him. Donald's lawyer, Steve Sullivan, had this to say in court. This was an accidental act. It was grossly foolhardy. It took him only a matter of minutes to realize his error. This is clearly a highly unusual and unfortunate case. Not surprisingly, it has attracted a good deal of adverse publicity. Donald has been embarrassed by the publicity, but does not seek to feel sorry for himself. Right on. I like his attitude. And he was just hit with a single charge of possessing a Class A drug. His mistake could have had some disastrous consequences, but thankfully it didn't. Hey, at least Donnie didn't flash anybody like our girl Wendy did. It's not like he answered the door dressed like Tony Montana, handing the kids some coke, flashing them, and saying, say hello to my little friend. Missed opportunity, I suppose. We got time for one more quickie. Story number 3 takes place in Texas back in 2021, and it involves a firearm. I'll give you a moment to pick your jaws up off the floor. It's shocking, I know. This idiot, 35-year-old Monica Bradford, well, she isn't taking part in the Halloween festivities, which is just fine. But if you're not going to hand out candy, turn off your lights. Close the curtains, and if anyone rings your doorbell, just ignore it. I've done it plenty of times. No big deal. But no, Monica has her front porch light on, and her house is visited several times by kiddies. And each time, nitwit Monica screams at the children to get off her property. Finally, around 7 p.m., she's had enough. Her doorbell rings once again. There's a 7-year-old child eagerly awaiting her to answer, and she does, with a loaded shotgun in her hands, pointing it right at the child. Of course, this frightens them, and they go running back to their parents, who stood at the edge of the driveway in shock and horror. Thankfully, the child wasn't harmed, at least not physically. Mentally, that may be another story. Monica's neighbor was questioned about the events leading up to this incident, and she said, "She just asked me, 'Who's in my driveway?' And I was like, 'I don't know.' She said, 'Fine, since you can't tell me, I'm going to get my shotgun.'" I was in shock. It's Halloween. There are kids everywhere. How can somebody just come out with a weapon and scare these kids? End quote. Police were called to the scene, and Moronica Bradford was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Crazy stuff. And yeah, there you have it. A few cautionary tales heading into Halloween. These incidents are few and far between, but they do happen. So be ready. Keep your head on a swivel. But above all else, I hope you all have a safe and happy Halloween. Peace.
We turn to our right and find ourselves in a graveyard. Among the tombstones, we see Johanna and Annie from Fresh Hell podcast, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a candle. They are historians of the dark arts, and their stories will reveal the hidden horrors of the past.
I'm Annie in America.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and we're the hosts of Fresh Hell podcast, bringing you international true stories of murder, mystery, and the macabre events in history.
Today, we're very excited to share one of our favorite cases in a much more condensed version from our usual program. This is the story of the Greenbrier Ghost, the only case in the United States where a ghost helped to convict a cold-blooded murderer. Our story takes place in the late 1800s, when West Virginia was still a fairly new state, having split from Confederate Virginia during the American Civil War, becoming a state in 1863. Erasmus Stribling Trout Shue didn't much like his name. He was one of at least 7 children born to parents Elizabeth and Jacob in Mount Solon, Virginia, around 1861. His siblings, Susan, James, John, and so forth, had all been given names one might find on a souvenir keychain, but not Erasmus, who was clearly salty about it and hated his name, so we're going to keep on using it.
Erasmus was a tall, dark, and handsome man who, like his father, worked as a blacksmith. His first marriage was to Ellie Estelyn Cutlip, known as Esty. They married in 1885 when she was 18 years old, and not long after their marriage, he began to hit her. He allegedly beat Esty so badly, a group of men in town got together and beat the hell out of him, then threw him into a frozen river, but he survived. And, of course, he kept on hitting her. They had a daughter in 1887, and in 1889, when Erasmus went to prison for stealing horses, she divorced him on grounds of abuse, and she and her daughter got out of that marriage alive. It wasn't long after he was released from prison that he met his second wife, Lucy Ann Tritt. Lucy was born around 1870 in Greenbrier County near Alderson, West Virginia, to parents Isaac and Elizabeth. They were married in June 1894 and lived on Droop Mountain in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, with his family. 8 months later, on 11th of February 1895, Lucy was dead. She was 24 years old and the death was not investigated. According to Erasmus, she had a bad fall and struck her head on a rock. And the locals, the man who had already tried and failed to kill him, did not believe him. Fearing for his own life, Erasmus moves over the mountain to Greenbrier, where he opens a forge and he changes his name to Edward, but everyone calls him Trout. Okay, it's now 127 years ago, October of 1896. Erasmus meets the beautiful 23-year-old Elva Sona Hester when her family visited the forge, and she was immediately infatuated with this handsome stranger. Her parents, Jacob Hedges Hester, a farmer, and Mary Jane Robinson Hester, did not approve. But despite their protests, on 20th of October 1896, Erasmus Stribling Trout Shue married Elva Sona Hester at the local church. Mary Jane is even more upset when after the wedding, Sona starts to look pale and tired. She's suddenly clumsy with bruises all over her body to show for it. Acting the concerned husband, Trout makes a big show of repeatedly summoning the doctor, and the doctor of course can't find a clear cause for her symptoms. 3 months after Sona was married, on 22nd of January 1897, she's found dead at the bottom of the stairs. Her body is found by an errand boy who lived nearby. Erasmus had hired him the day before to come check on his sick wife, and the traumatized boy runs home to his mother and then to the forge to tell Trout the terrible news, and Trout sends the boy to get the doctor.
When the doctor arrives, Zona has been carried upstairs by her husband, who has also changed his wife's clothing. Zona now wears a dress with a very high collar. He's holding her, cradling her head, and sobbing uncontrollably. And if there's one thing this doctor cannot cope with, it's another man's tears. So ultimately, Dr. Knapp can't really get that close and doesn't examine her at all. Her cause of death is reported as everlasting faint, but he later changed it to complications from pregnancy.
And if this sounds bizarre, let us remind you that when things like fast cars and trains first became common, doctors thought it would be unsafe for women because the uterus might fly out of a woman if she tried to stop when traveling at speed.
Now, it is possible that she was pregnant, which maybe made her unusually clumsy, but there's really no reason to think that her injuries were anything other than his abusing her and setting himself up as the concerned husband with a clumsy wife. And it almost works.
The grieving widower helps to prepare the body for wake and burial. Erasmus was very attentive to his dead wife, placing her in her casket himself, always cradling her head. He folded a sheet and put it on one side of her head, and then put a folded dress on the other side, and then he tied a large scarf around her neck. And when family members remarked that it didn't really go with the dress she was wearing for burial, he began again to sob, saying it was her favorite scarf and she would want it with her. She was waked at her parents' home, with Trout staying at the head of his wife's casket until she was buried at the cemetery at Sewell Chapel Methodist Cemetery in Meadow Bluff. And that probably would have been it, just another tragic and untimely death of a clumsy young bride if it weren't for the intervention of her ghost.
That's right. Her ghost appeared to her mother 4 nights in a row and told her mother what had really happened. She didn't fall down the stairs. She had been murdered. Less than a month after her beloved daughter's death, Mary Jane was telling everyone everything. So let's talk about the supernatural events following Zona's death. First, when washing the white sheet that had been placed in the coffin to stabilize Zona's head, it turned the water blood red and then left the cloth permanently discolored pink. Then, more shockingly, she said that she had seen Zona's spirit not once, but 4 times. According to Mary Jane, she had prayed for her daughter to come to her and to explain what had happened to her, and Zona had obliged. Each time she appeared, she was able to give a little more information until finally she disclosed to her mother that Trout had been increasingly violent, and the night she died, he became enraged when she made a dinner he wasn't happy with, and that she was murdered when during the beating, he broke her neck at, quote, the first joint, end quote. To show exactly what she meant by this, as she turned for the last time and began to walk away from her mother, Zona paused, turned her head around 180 degrees, made eye contact with her mother, and then vanished. Obviously, this was all the proof Mary Jane needed, and she began telling everyone that Trout had murdered her daughter. His response was chilling, positively cold, simply saying dismissively that no one would ever prove it. Mary Jane's description was so disturbing that she got Dr. Knapp, who had signed the death certificate, to agree that he might have been mistaken in his cause of death determination, which in turn convinced the local prosecutor, John Preston, to reopen the case. Thanks to Mary Jane's tenacity and Dr. Knapp's honesty, an exhumation was ordered and an inquest jury assembled. Trout was furious about the exhumation. The flouncy scarf had almost worked. Fortunately, because she died in winter, Zona's body was perfectly preserved. Exactly 1 month after her death, not 1, but 3 medical doctors performed a new autopsy on Zona, and the new cause of death was anoxia by manual strangulation compounded by a broken neck. Anoxia means a lack of oxygen to the brain. She had been strangled to death. Bruises in the shape of fingers were noted on Zona's neck, hidden by the high collar of her dress. Her windpipe was crushed, ligaments in her neck were torn, and her first and second cervical vertebrae were both fractured. That is to say, just as she had told her mother, her neck was broken at the first joint. At the inquest, Trout denied everything but had no alibi. Zona's death was reclassified as a homicide, and he was charged with her murder.
While awaiting trial, people started to talk about Trout's other marriages, his second wife's mysterious death, now the subject of wild speculation, as was the cause of Zona's illness before death. Trout himself, locked up in Lewisburg, wasn't worried because they couldn't prove anything, and besides, he always knew he'd have 7 wives, and he wasn't even halfway yet. Prosecutor John Preston knew that Mary Jane's ghost story would never be considered proof, and he had no plans to bring it up during the trial. He had plenty of evidence to convict Trout without it. William Rucker, the defense attorney, did bring it up when he cross-examined Mary Jane. He planned to discredit her by making her look like she had lost her mind in her grief over her daughter. It backfired. She calmly explained what she had seen. She stuck to her story, and in the end, jurors believed her. Trout testified on his own behalf, which was a mistake. He rambled and no one believed him or found him even a little bit likable.
The thing I just can't stop thinking about was the specificity of her mother knowing it was the first joint of the neck that was broken, and it was. That is hard to discount. After an hour and 10 minutes, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. They made a note to say that they convicted on circumstantial evidence and not the ghost story, because of course they had to say that. In June of 1897, Trout was sentenced to life in prison, but again the locals were furious and quickly formed a lynch mob. The sheriff had to hide Trout in the woods so he wouldn't be hanged, and then he had to convince the mob to lay down weapons and go home. 4 of those men would later be indicted for attempted lynching. At last, Erasmus Trout was taken to the now infamous West Virginia State Penitentiary in Moundsville, with its tiny, cold, haunted cells. And that's where he died, not 3 years later, on March 1st, 1900, of the measles. He was 37 years old. Today, there's a marker on Route 60 which reads, quote, "Interred in nearby cemetery is Zona Hester Shue. Her death in 1897 was presumed natural until her spirit appeared to her mother to describe how she was killed by her husband Edward. Autopsy on the exhumed body verified the apparition's account. Edward, found guilty of murder, was sentenced to the state prison, only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer." End quote. And that is the story of the Greenbrier ghost. Did Zona's spirit return to her mother? Or did her mother do what was needed to be done in order to convict a dangerous man? Tell us what you think.
We continue our journey through the woods, deeper into the darkness. We still hear its soft, enticing, and unmistakable voice calling to us. We keep walking as we ponder how to respond. We can hear the sound of something moving in the bushes, but we cannot see what it is. We quicken our pace, eager to reach the clearing where the final 6 podcast hosts are waiting. We finally reach the clearing and we see them gathered around a campfire. They are the ones who will lead us into those darkest corners of the human psyche and the supernatural realm. So gather round, dear listener, as the forest darkens around us. Sandy from Twisted Travel and True Crime is who we see first. She specializes in unsolved murders, a host whose voice is a chilling breeze on a moonless night. Her stories will take us down dark and twisted paths where we will learn about the dark side of human nature.
Rebecca Gay loved the spooky season. Her home in Mount Pleasant Trailer Park in Michigan stood out among the sea of tiny homes because it was covered in scarecrows. With 13 of them adorning her mobile home and tiny yard, Rebecca was excited to take her 3-year-old Conway trick-or-treating for the first time. It was a season of firsts for her, as she had recently acquired her own home, a place she could decorate to her heart's content. And for Rebecca, scarecrows were a must-have for All Hallows Eve. Her journey hadn't been easy, but at age 24, things were looking up for her. She and her fiancé, Aaron, were finally going to move into their very own home. Rebecca and her son Conway bid farewell to the comfort of Aaron's parents' house in August. With the help of her extended family, they moved into the mobile home she was renting. The move brought her closer to her workplace and to her mother's home, which was a blessing for both of them. Aaron planned to join them once he found a job closer to Rebecca. Although she longed for Aaron's presence, Rebecca knew she had to be patient. She relied on her side of the family for support, and they were always there for her. They attended Christ Community Fellowship Church together, where Rebecca's mother was engaged to John White, the pastor. John became involved in Rebecca's life, babysitting Conway and assisting both Rebecca and her mother whenever he could. He even helped Rebecca set up her new trailer. They teased her about her spooky decorations and listened to her excitedly talk about Conway's Halloween costume and their plans for the holiday. Rebecca had arranged to work the earliest shift on Halloween Day. That way she would have plenty of time to pick up Conway and get him ready for trick-or-treating. However, when Rebecca didn't show up for work that morning, her co-workers grew concerned. She was always punctual, so her absence was unusual. They tried calling her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Worried, they decided to check on her at her house. Her car wasn't in the driveway, but they saw it across the street, backed into some brush behind a local bar. The bar was locked, as was Rebecca's home. Growing increasingly worried, her co-workers contacted her landlord, who came to unlock the door. Rebecca was nowhere to be found, but her purse sat on the kitchen table. It was one of her prized possessions, and she wouldn't go anywhere without it. Her cell phone and keys were missing. As they searched the house, they noticed the living room carpet was matted down, except for one small area, and there were small red stains on it. Alarmed, they called the police and informed Rebecca's family and friends, who immediately joined in the search. Thankfully, they discovered that Conway was safe and with his biological father. The police interviewed Rebecca's family and friends, starting with Aaron, who had last spoken to her the night before her disappearance. He mentioned that they had a pleasant conversation, but when he texted her on Halloween morning, she didn't reply. It seemed as though the message hadn't gone through at all. This was unusual, as they hadn't been fighting, and Rebecca typically charged her phone and was responsive. The police believed Aaron's genuine concern and cleared him of suspicion. Next, they turned their attention to Chad, Rebecca's ex and Conway's father. He cooperated with the police, stating that he and Rebecca had been co-parenting well, without any major issues. He grew frustrated with the constant questioning, as he wanted to join the search for the person who had taken Rebecca. The police tended to believe him, too, leaving them puzzled. There were no signs of forced entry at Rebecca's home, so the police concluded that Rebecca had likely been abducted by someone she knew and trusted. As they built a timeline for her disappearance, they discovered that Rebecca was supposed to meet Chad at a Myers department store parking lot to exchange custody of Conway. However, John, her soon-to-be father-in-law, had dropped off Conway instead, without Rebecca informing Chad about the change in plans. The investigators turned their eyes towards John, who had been actively involved in the search efforts for Rebecca and had willingly cooperated with the police. They discovered that he was the pastor at the local church and that he had reached out to his congregation that morning, urging them to assist in the search for Rebecca and pray for her safe return. He said that he had gone to Rebecca's trailer to babysit Conway that morning. He arrived at 6:30 and heard Rebecca getting ready for work. He fell asleep on the couch and was later woken by Conway, and Rebecca had gone. Given that John was the last person known to have been in Rebecca's presence, the police requested that he take a polygraph test. Initially hesitant, John eventually agreed to undergo the test. Since the police department in Mount Pleasant, Michigan didn't have its own polygraph machine, they planned to take John to the nearest one, in Lansing, approximately an hour away. During the drive, the officer who was accompanying him engaged in small talk, hoping to ease his nervousness. The officer asked John about his background and personal life, eventually broaching the topic of his concerns about the polygraph. John admitted he was worried because he had a criminal past, revealing that he had been involved in an attempted murder case that was ultimately dismissed. It resulted in a 2-year prison sentence. The thing was, John wasn't telling everything about his past. Unlike the scarecrows that decorated Rebecca's house, this officer had a brain. He pulled up John's criminal record, and to his astonishment, he discovered that the man who presented himself as a devoted preacher had a far from saintly past. In 1980, when John was just 22 years old and living with his family in Battle Creek, Michigan, he invited his 17-year-old neighbor, Teresa Atherton, to his basement under the pretense of showing her his racetrack. Teresa, being a kind-hearted girl, likely feigned interest out of politeness. However, as she turned to face the racetrack, John viciously stabbed her under the right shoulder blade. With a chilling smile on his face, he continued to stab her a total of 14 times before choking her and callously uttering the words, "You're going to go now." Miraculously, Teresa survived this brutal attack, and John White was arrested. He did go to jail, and he did only serve 2 years. Fast forward to 1994. John was still married to his first wife, despite his troubled past. Yes, I can't explain that one. His wife was pregnant with their third child when John started an affair with a co-worker named Vicky Wall. When Vicky suddenly disappeared, suspicion immediately fell on John. He initially denied any involvement in her disappearance, claiming he had no knowledge of what happened to her. However, when he was confronted with surveillance footage showing Vicky getting into a large pickup truck with a bearded man in the Meijer parking lot, he admitted to meeting her, but insisted he was alive when he left her. As the detectives continued their investigation, Vicky's relatives looked for her body, convinced she was buried nearby. Their worst fears were confirmed 6 weeks later when a resident stumbled upon a gruesome scene. Her body was decomposed and partially covered by a shirt and bra around her neck. The autopsy couldn't determine the cause of death, but the pathologist believed it was a homicide. John was charged with murder. However, due to the lack of conclusive evidence and the difficulty in determining the cause of death, he ultimately pled guilty to involuntary manslaughter. Police believed that John's motive for killing Vicky was that she was pressuring him about their affair, and maybe she threatened to tell his wife. The judge recognized John's dangerous nature and sentenced him to the maximum term of 8 to 15 years in prison. After serving nearly 13 years, he was released and relocated to Mount Pleasant, where he took on the persona of Pastor White, fiancé to Sally, an all-around good guy. Except he wasn't. If there was good in John, it was that he would eventually admit to police what he had done to Rebecca that Halloween morning. Behind closed doors, he had scoured the darkest corners of the internet, immersing himself in depravity and feeding his dark desires. The screen flickered with images that fascinated and repulsed him. Murder and necrophilia were consistently on his mind. That night, as Rebecca tucked her son into bed and kissed him goodnight, she had no idea that it would be for the last time. At 2 a.m, she was sleeping peacefully when she was startled awake by a chilling sound and a sense of panic. She walked out of her room, her heart pounding in her chest, worried that her son was up, or something worse. In a horrifying instant, John pounced on her, his face contorted with a mixture of madness and sadistic pleasure. He held a rubber mallet in his hand, and with brutal force he struck her repeatedly. Her cries for help were drowned out by the sickening thud of the mallet as it connected with her head. Rebecca, in the midst of the brutal attack, recognized her assailant. She managed to utter the words, "I know you," before John tightened a zip tie around her neck, strangling her. Then he had his way with her. John's true nature came to the surface in the early hours of Halloween morning, leaving Sally, Rebecca's mother, in a state of profound shock. Not only had she lost her beloved daughter, but she found out that she had fallen in love with the murderer. In the courtroom, as the judge pronounced the sentence, John gazed around the room with an unsettling detachment, seeming unaffected by the pain he had inflicted on Rebecca and her loved ones. The judge handed down a severe sentence, condemning him to between 56 and 85 years in prison. You are safe from John Douglas White this Halloween, but be aware of all the other ghosts, ghouls, and things that go bump in the night. If you'd like to hear more details about this case, I'd like to invite you to listen to the extended version called The Devil's Disguise, The Murder of Rebecca Gay. Thanks for listening to Twisted Travel and True Crime and for all the good things you do to support these podcasts. I wish you all fair winds, following seas, and the safest of Halloween nights.
You're listening to an episode of PNW Haunts and Homicides on True Crime by Indie Drop-In. We're going to take a quick break. And now back to this episode of PNW Haunts and Homicides.
Nikki and Mariah, the hosts of Body to Burial, speak each week to experts who have seen and heard things that will make our blood run cold. Their tales are like a pair of haunting eyes, ever watching in the darkness, ready to reveal the truth behind the unexplained in crimes, in death, and in what might happen after.
This week's episode, I think you're just gonna be so excited about.
Okay.
I feel like it speaks to your soul, and I'm really excited for you to hear it and participate. So we have two gentlemen joining us today, which I guess is actually another Body to Burial first for us. We have a duo.
Ooh.
So we have Matthew, and Matthew is a Chicago Fire Department firefighter.
Okay.
And we have David, who is a Chicago police officer.
Okay.
And I'm sure you're wondering, why do we have a firefighter and a police officer? Why am I so jazzed about that?
Yeah, I am.
Right. Well, the dynamic duo of Matt and David, they also have a little side hustle, which you know I love.
Uh-huh.
Paranormal investigators.
Oh, I love that. You know I love that.
Yeah. So, Queen Mary, all the fun stuff. All I want to do right now is sing the Ghostbusters theme song, but I won't do that to our listeners. But it's literally on loop in my brain right now.
Oh my God. No, that is really a different side hustle than what their normal job is. That's incredible, actually. Yes.
So I'm super pumped.
Oh, I love ghost stuff. Okay. Yeah, I'm excited.
Well, let me go grab them.
Oh, okay.
Hello, Matthew, David, can you hear us?
This is Dave. Can you hear me?
Yay. Yes.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
And I'm on too.
Yay. Hi, Matt. Thank you both for taking the time to talk to us. I appreciate you indulging in our request to have you guys. Nikki is obsessed with paranormal and all the shows. And so this is really exciting for her to have you guys here.
Yeah, I really am. I'm so excited.
Let's jump into it. I think the first question we have to get out of the way is, how did this come about? I call it a side hustle, but how did you guys go from being a firefighter, police officer, to deciding to investigate paranormal activities? How do you even get into that? What sparks the idea?
Matt, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So me and Dave met. Dave had already been investigating, and I was actually out on the street with the fire truck collecting for Make-A-Wish, shake the boot, collect the money for kids and stuff like that. And Dave had rolled up in what we call Misty, which is our command center. I saw his police shirt and I'm like, what kind of special? I thought he was like a special unit with the Chicago Police Department. So I'm like, oh, what's going on here? Who are you? And he goes, well, I'm not sure if you believe it or not, but I'm a paranormal investigator. And I'm like, get out of here. We had maybe 30 seconds to a minute to actually converse, because it was like the light had turned green. He was off to his one of his other jobs. I went back to collecting, and I thought about it later. I sent Dave an email. I looked him up. I looked up all his evidence, and I had been interested in the paranormal, never really did any investigations. So I looked up his stuff and looked him up, sent him an email, say, hey, I'd love to join you, check out an investigation. And I think maybe a month or two, something came up. And so it's been, I don't even know how long that's been, maybe 8 years, Dave. What do you think?
Sounds right. Yeah, I lost track, but something like that.
Yeah.
So then how did you, that's going to sound like, what is that, Sixth Sense? Like, I see dead people, but how did you even get into that? Like, where you could know how to do it, all that stuff?
I've become, I'm still skeptical, of course, because that's what I have to be. It's like,
you got to be, even I am at times. You can't be all in paranormal. You got to look at both angles.
Yeah. So I have to see it to believe it. And then one of the first full body apparition that we captured on camera was it blew my mind. I couldn't believe it, because I was like, I was there. I knew what was going on. I mean, we didn't see it physically with our eyes. Actually, I wasn't even in the room when it happened, but David took a series of pictures with a full spectrum camera. And later on, through evidence review, he finds this like full bodied shadow.
No.
It almost looked like a Civil War soldier or somebody in a jumpsuit. It was a building that used to be used as a police station.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. Yeah. The Inglewood alarm office.
Yeah.
That is so interesting to me.
Yeah.
Do people call you and say, hey, I think my house is haunted? Or you just kind of go to different kind of known
both
paranormal
we get a
places?
lot of emails all the time, from Facebook messages to the website, emails, word of mouth. And, when I first started this, I used to try to go to all of them, but it just can't do it, because with Matt, myself, and some of the other members, sometimes we got to take off work. It's costing money, using a vacation day, or we can do it. So we try to pick and choose which ones are important or which ones we would really like to go to. And then after doing an investigation, it takes days, weeks to go through everything and match everything up. So we try to pick and choose the ones that need help, the good ones.
So, because I had told Mariah this a really long time ago, but I had an apartment. I moved out of it 2 months early because I swear it was haunted. And then one of my, it really was, I swear. And then one of my friends from work, she was telling me to like sage the place. And then she was telling me to tell it to go to the light. So I turned on the TV as loud as I could because I was afraid it was going to tell me no. And like something. And so I did that and nothing happened, but I got a dog. And after I got my dog, things kind of settled down a little bit, but I still moved out early. And then when you guys say you went to my apartment and you're like, yeah, there's a creeper in here, what would you do to get them to try and go away?
Well, depending on what your beliefs are, there's different things you can do. But when it comes to like apartments, you might have to do a daily, weekly, monthly. You'd have to see what works. But usually when we cleanse ourselves, our equipment and stuff after an investigation, we use white sage, we use Palo Santo, holy wood. And then I have what is called dragon's blood. It's basically sage, but it's like has a reddish tint to it, and it's a little more kick to it.
Okay. I'll use anything. I'll use it all. It doesn't.
Yeah, I also have frankincense and myrrh. That's what a lot of the churches use. Especially when it comes to like a funeral and a body pass. And if you see like the priest or the pastor with the incense going around the body, and it's most of the time that's like frankincense and myrrh. So sometimes I'll use that maybe for spirit to go into the light or go to the next step.
Have you ever encountered evil, I guess? Because there's probably just like, grandma that passed and she likes her house and she's hanging out, or, but then there's also the dangerous-y type ones, I guess. Is that
a few, until I experienced it myself, and like Matt's pretty much the same way, correct? Until we experience it ourselves. I'll keep an open mind, but sometimes I'll be like, oh, that's full of beep, but once I experience it or it comes something close to it, then I'm like, oh my God, there's something to that.
Yeah.
But there's a few cases that open my eyes that looks like there's evil out there. And from my experiences dealing with different psychic mediums that I trust and stuff, whatever the reason is, you got earthbound spirits, and then you got more sinister or evil stuff. If that's what that's what you believe. That's what I'm tending to believe now.
Okay.
But earthbound is just for whatever reason the spirits did not move on to the next step. Whatever you decide that next step is, they just stayed earthbound. And then they say, if you haven't moved on to the next step, and you're earthbound, you're going to be that same person you were when you were living. So if you were a crabby old man or old lady and you're in their house, they might be treating you the same way, So I do get a lot of get outs, get out of here, get out. And it's probably the old man thinking I'm trespassing. Get out.
How is that? Oh yeah. Like where you can hear, like where you can hear something that says like, get out.
Yes. I get that a lot.
No.
A lot of help me's and a lot of get outs.
And when you hear like weeks later, when you finish the investigation, that's when you're listening to the get outs, or can you hear it right then and there?
That there is times, it's not often, but there's times, especially if you're a little more sensitive. Like sometimes it seems like I'm able to tune in a little more than some of the other people, where I could hear it with my own ears. But there's times you could hear stuff with your own ears, disembodied voices that comes through strong, where you don't need the frequencies of the voice recorders or, the mics picking it up. Sometimes we're able to hear it, but there's something out there. I think it's spirits, but if not, maybe it's another dimension of some type, or we're tapping into something. But there's definitely, and I say you would agree, Matt, there's intelligent spirits or whatever you want to call it out there that can communicate back. And there's stuff that's trapped energy, residual energy, that no matter if you're there or not, it's going to make that same noise, same footsteps, same door open. It's just for some reason, some energy's being trapped in that area or that house or whatever you want to call it, that room.
And you think they've already gone, let's just say, to the light or like beyond, but their energy, a little bit of their energy's there? It
could be something. I'll give you an example on a case that we handled. I don't think you were at that one, Matt, but there was a house in Wisconsin where this lady was complaining about a male spirit that would lean against the fireplace. From the fireplace, it would go down the hallway to her room, stand over her, and then back to the fireplace. That's the route it would take. It had nothing to do with the house. And she physically
could see him?
Yes.
Like it's a physical thing?
Yes.
Okay.
So she had the same spirit at the house she lived in before. So she moved to this new house. She was there 6 months, still experiencing that spirit, among other stuff that I could get into later. But anyway, when we were there, we're investigating. Somehow we linked this fireplace. It was a fake fireplace, and she was an artist. So she saw it on the curbside at her old place and didn't know really the history on it. She's like, "Oh, this is a nice piece of art," and she fixed it up. And from that place, brought it to her new place, and it had this male spirit. So we linked that this male spirit was attached to this piece, the fireplace.
Yeah.
So that night she had us get rid of it. And from that point on, she never saw it again. But we found out later, interviewing old neighbors, that the guy who made this piece committed suicide, and this was his favorite piece. And then once he died, they removed all his belongings and put him on the curb or whatever, and that's when she picked it up. But so that male spirit who committed suicide was attached to this fake fireplace.
Yeah. Does that happen a lot? Because I've heard of that too. That's why my husband's like, never get anything from a flea market.
Yeah, I'm cautious myself when it comes to that. But they say some of the mediums that we deal with, and I can't say it works 100%. They preach that if you're going to buy anything used, any antiques, garage sales, have a bottle filled with water and sea salt, a spray bottle, and spray the item before putting it in your car. And they kind of compare it to like if you're cooking with a Teflon pan, how nothing sticks to it. So when you coat it with the sea salt and water, that energy is supposed to slide right off.
Yeah, that's because that just reminded me of what I was going to ask you before was, can anything come home with you, like get attached to you?
Yes. I wasn't a believer in that. I thought that was full of crap. Excuse my expression. But until I experienced it myself, at least a handful of times. And it took that to get me into saging and protecting myself, family, other team members with, saging after an investigation, because there's been a handful of times. Thank God, nothing bad. Even one time I had family over from out of state, and they experienced it too, and never had a problem in my house till I, started this. And it's just something like my very first investigation where I had something follow me. I think it's something that I knew they knew I saw it or heard it, and just want us to continue to communicate. So it's tugging my shirt. And this is all new to me. I have to admit, I ran like a little baby to my wife. Anna! I remember I was in the kitchen, and we just had the basement all redone with a nice family room and stuff put down there. And I'm in the kitchen. I think I was cooking dinner, and I get like 3 or 4 tugs on my shirt. I mean, really hard where it's pulling. I'm like, and I jump, and I look, and I look, and there's no one around, and there's nothing I could have got hooked on. And I was like a Scooby-Doo, running down, and Anna, this just happened to me, and you're only human until you start experiencing it. But I was in the shower, and I hear a male's voice start whispering in my ear, and this was from the same investigation. But I jumped out like a little kid. I hate to admit, but I tore down the shower curtains, and I was just stunned. I'm like, what the heck is going on here? But so yeah, it took that for me to start learning, through the help of the psychic mediums we deal with, how to protect myself, the house, my wife, daughter. The last thing I want to do is bring something home and then have them, being bothered with stuff. So,
yeah.
But, it's a matter of telling them, okay, I know you're here. You're not welcome. It's time for you to leave. Very respectful because, it could be someone's mother, father, grandfather, whatever, so talk to it like you and I are talking and just, sometimes you have to give it demands and then go through the process of staging every room, every corner of the room. And, there's certain ways of doing things and tell it to leave. And it was no problem. I never experienced it again.
Does it usually leave? Like, is that normal? Like for it to go with doing all those steps?
Yeah, it depends. They say like I said, I can't prove this, but this is what I've been told. For people in that field, like the psychic mediums that go to cleansing homes and stuff, they say you can't force an unwilling earthbound spirit to leave. There's things you could do to decrease its energy with saging. You might maybe force it out of the house, but it could possibly come back. This is why you got to continue.
Melissa and Daniel from Till Death Do Us Part podcast study the murders, myths, and legends of the world. They bring revealing tales of restless spirits that drift through the darkness, like this one, yearning to find their way home.
Hello, and welcome to Till Death Do Us Part.
I'm Daniel.
And I'm his lovely wife, Melissa.
Yes, she is.
Now, I usually tell Daniel and our 11 listeners true crime cases involving couples whose love story eventually turned into murder. But today I'm going to share with all of you a haunting. The haunting of the Banff Springs Hotel, which is now known as the Fairmont Banff Springs.
Banff.
Say that without spitting.
Banffa. I want to go. Is it expensive?
Yeah.
Nope, I don't want to go anymore.
This majestic hotel is located in Canada's Rocky Mountains, in the heart of Banff National Park in Banff, Alberta, Canada.
How many more times are you going to say Banffa?
Hopefully no more, because I can hardly say it.
Oh my gosh.
It was opened in 1888 by the Canadian Pacific Railway as a retreat for traveling businessmen. The original structure was a 5-story wood frame and was able to accommodate 280 guests. The hotel drew its water from the nearby natural springs. The pipe system filled the hotel's pool with thermal spring water.
Oh, that's kind of awesome.
That sounds lovely. A luxurious oasis for only $3.50 a night.
Deal.
Which is about $120 today.
Is it $120 a day to stay there?
It is not. I just looked it up. It's about $500 to $600 a night.
What?
But it is Halloween. It is October.
Yeah.
But in 1926, there was a devastating fire that burned the wooden structure to the ground. A new steel structure was built in its place using limestone rock from nearby Mount Rundle. The Banff Springs Hotel was built by the workmanship of hundreds of Italian stonecutters and Scottish stonemasons.
So it's quite a structure now.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, like it's not going to blow away.
No. And this has helped to give the hotel its nickname of the Castle in the Rockies.
Nice.
It very much looks like a castle. In the last few decades, the hotel has given way to a few ghost tales. And I'm about to tell you those.
That's good because I believe in ghosts.
No, you don't.
No.
Don't lie to these good people that are listening right now.
It's fine.
He does not believe in the paranormal or anything of that nature.
No, so I would gladly stay in a haunted hotel because it's not going to be haunted and it's probably going to be my best night's sleep ever.
Well, first we have the ghost bride. She's been seen dancing in the ballroom or walking up one of the marble staircases, her face shrouded behind a white veil. It is said that this specter is the ghost of a young woman who was due to be married on the hotel grounds in the early 1930s, when, as she was walking down the staircase to the waiting arms of her soon-to-be husband, her gown caught on fire by one of the many candles that adorn the stairwell. The bride stepped on the hem of her dress, causing her to lose her footing and fall forward to the bottom of the marble staircase. The bride snapped her neck in the process and died. The ghost bride has never left the Grand Hotel, and she spends her nights searching for her lost love.
Okay, so she not only catches fire, but she trips, falls, and breaks her neck
Yeah.
while her dress is on fire.
It's like a triple threat.
Holy crap. I already forgot. But when did the thing burn to the ground?
1927.
Oh, okay. So this was
This
right
was
before
after. This was after. This was in the 1930s.
that. Okay.
The bride's haunting is so well known that in 2014, a collector coin and stamp were distributed to commemorate her story. But she doesn't have a name, so that's interesting. Another resident ghost is known by his Christian name, a Mr. Samuel Macaulay, a Scotsman. Mr. Macaulay was the lead bellman at the hotel in the 1960s up through the 1970s. He loved the hotel so much that on his deathbed in 1975, Sam said that he would return to the Banff Springs after his death to haunt its halls. And he does.
So there is life after death. It gives you something to do. You have something to look forward to.
I just love these, like, I'm going to haunt the halls. Please don't.
Wow.
Guests of the hotel have encountered this helpful and friendly bellhop wearing an out-of-date bellhop's uniform with a strong Scottish brogue. But when offered a tip, he just vanishes. One of the most famous tales was that of two women who had locked themselves out of their hotel room. They headed down to the front desk and waited for the bellhop on duty for 15 minutes. The women decided to walk back up to their room. Once they were back at their door, a man in an older-looking bellhop uniform approached them and unlocked their hotel room door. They thanked the man, and he happily walked away.
I have a serious question.
What's that?
Okay. I come out in an old bellhop uniform, walk around the house. What do you think? Does that work for you or no?
I'm not giving you a tip for that.
Really?
Maybe.
All right.
Okay, but it kind of is scary that he can just get into any room, right?
Yeah, because there's no privacy.
No, there's no privacy at this hotel now. Sam is also seen in his old office on the mezzanine floor, which has been converted into an actual guest room. But the saddest tale of all is that of room 873. I also read that it was room 875.
Well, they're next door to each other.
I think so. A young family was staying in the room, and one night the husband and wife began arguing. The husband went down to the hotel bar and became intoxicated. He grabbed a large knife from the kitchen and stabbed his wife and daughter to death in room 873 or 875, and then turned the knife on himself. Guests of the room have complained of hearing disembodied screams and shrieks in the middle of the night. If they dared turn on the light, they would see bloody handprints on the bathroom mirror that could not be washed away. Due to the paranormal activity within those four walls, management made the decision to brick up the entrance to the room. Recent guests who are permitted on the 8th floor have said that there is no room 873 or 875, even though the baseboard is cut where a door used to be. There is a light hanging over an empty space on the wall where a door should be. It is also said that if you knock on an area of the wall, you hear a hollow sound.
Oh boy.
A few guests have even reported seeing a young girl standing outside of a room, looking as if she is lost.
Okay, so if you had a hotel and allegedly there were a couple of rooms that were haunted, wouldn't you leave those open? And then, the word would get out that those are haunted rooms?
Yeah, I'd charge more.
You would get a line of people wanting to stay in those. I would.
Yeah, I'd totally keep it open. I did go down the Reddit hole and came across something very interesting.
Okay.
Reddit user TJ Smudger92 said that he used to work at the Banff Springs Hotel. TJ claims that all the ghost stories and paranormal activity are made up by the previous staff.
There it is.
The origins of the ghost bride were told to TJ by the hotel's former vice president. In 1986, a group of the hotel's colleagues set out to see who could come up with the best ghost story, and one of them came up with the story of the bride, and it is still told today. Sam the Bellman is based on a real former bellhop who worked in the hotel for 20 years. The ghost was made up by the old head of the bell desk. It became a sort of joke. If a bag ended up in the wrong room, it would be blamed on Sam the ghost.
Huh.
The haunted room 873 or 875 cannot be found on the 8th floor any longer because the room next to it was expanded.
I was totally going to say that.
Encompassing the room.
Yeah, why don't they just expand the room next door into a bigger room? And then if they wanted to, someone wanted a bigger room, then they'd have it available.
Because I had read that on the 8th floor, the rooms are tiny.
Yeah.
So they wanted to have bigger rooms, so they were expanding these rooms.
Right.
If you happen to stay in the expanded room, you will be awakened all night by people knocking on the wall where the door used to be.
Oh, now that I could believe.
That's annoying.
Because I 100% would do that.
You would knock on the wall? Yeah, you
No.
would. So is the Banff Springs Hotel haunted or not?
Yes.
No one knows for sure, but it sounds fun. All right, well, we hope you enjoyed a little snippet of us.
Check out our podcast at Till Death Do Us Part. And
be careful.
For marriage is a life sentence.
And divorce is always the better option.
It is.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
We turn our attention next to two of the three hosts from Unethical Podcast. Celeste and Christy specialize in the study of fear and the human psyche, but in ways that will have you laughing maniacally as you do so. Their stories tell of the evil entities lurking in the inky shadows. Our mouths curve up at the humor until we realize that the darkness they speak of still surrounds us.
You're listening to an episode of PNW Haunts and Homicides on True Crime by Indie Drop-In. We're going to take a quick break. And now back to this episode of PNW Haunts and Homicides.
I'm Sarah Dingus, and I'm from Unethical Podcast, and Celeste is here with me today.
Hi, I'm also from Unethical Podcast.
And today I have a spooky little story coming from Tennessee. In 1804, John and Lucy Bell started a farm near the Red River in Robertson County, Tennessee, which is right outside of Nashville. They had 9 children at the time.
Whew, that's a lot.
Right? Years after they had moved to this property, in 1817, they began experiencing some strange things. And it all happened after John Bell shot at a dog-like creature, and it disappeared after he fired the shot. But then the children began seeing more strange creatures and hearing unexplained noises in the house, such as knocking on doors and windows, wings flapping on the ceiling, sounds of choking and strangling, heavy objects moving around, chains hitting and dragging on the floor.
Had these people ever seen a dog before? Because the wings and the chains, none of that sounds like a dog to me.
No, I like the best description we have is dog-like. So like maybe it was some demonic looking thing, but like it could have been a coyote. Who the fuck knows?
Okay. All right. Bat Yodi. The wild chained Bat Yodi. They're native to Nashville, Tennessee.
They escaped the caves.
All right, continue.
Sometimes these sounds were deafening to family members that they were so loud. And originally, they just referred to this as the spirit. And eventually it became known as the Bell Witch. And the Bell Witch would even speak to the family in a disembodied voice. And eventually it became violent. And it started beating and pinching and pulling hair, especially aimed at John Bell and his daughter, Betsy. They were the two that the Bell Witch absolutely hated.
This sounds like sibling rivalry. Yeah. Mama, John pulled my hair. No, I didn't. It was the Bell Witch, Mama. It wasn't me.
It does sound like some shit that kids would have like stuck just to like get out of things.
Sounds like they broke Pa's favorite smoking pipe, and they were like, "Wasn't us, Pa? It's got dang Bell Witch again."
But Lucy Bell, wife of John Bell, was least affected by the spirit. And the spirit even proclaimed her to be the most perfect woman living.
After 9 kids, that's no slouch.
Right? And I guess if you're going to have a spirit in your house, at least have it think you're a bad bitch, you know?
Right? Where are my complimentary spirits at?
And apparently, the Bell Witch would even sing to her when she was sick and just hang out and care for her, which I don't know how much a spirit can care for someone, but
hope she doesn't ghost her. But all right.
However, Betsy Bell endured the most torment from the witch. For years, the Bell Witch tormented her, and she wouldn't find relief from the spirit until she married her former school teacher and moved to Mississippi in 1820.
Quick question. The mom is being like caressed and having sweet nothings whispered in her ear and fed soup when she's ill by this spirit. But her daughter is getting like her hair pulled and being called a fat bitch and all that other stuff. And the mom is just like, she doesn't take a second to be like, witch, how come you're torturing my daughter?
I have no idea. And so Betsy was previously engaged to another man, but the Bell Witch hated that man. And so that's how she ended up with her former school teacher and marrying him and moving to Mississippi. And when she moved to Mississippi is when finally the torment stopped for her.
That would have been a much better time to use ghosting as a pun for breaking up with someone.
Betsy ghosted her first lover, moved on to her teacher.
If I had $1.
The Bell Witch referred to John Bell as Old Jack. He wouldn't be so lucky as to be able to escape this. And after years of physical violence and threats, John was bedridden on December 19th, 1820. And his son, John Jr., was caring for him and went to get medicine bottles out of the cabinet to help his father. And when he opened the cabinet, he only found one vial of a mysterious liquid. And the Bell Witch told him, "It's useless to relieve old Jack. I've got him this time." And upon hearing that, John Jr. threw the bottle into a fire and it burst in blue flame. And John Bell died December 20th, 1820. And supposedly the Bell Witch crashed his funeral service by obnoxiously singing drinking songs.
Okay, this is the husband of the one that the Bell Witch loved?
Yes.
Okay. So was she trying to smash, or like was her husband just not a nice man?
No explanation.
Oh, wow.
Just the Bell Witch hated John, loved Lucy, had a problem with a couple of the kids.
Okay, so the Bell Witch poisoned him to death.
Yes.
And then took all the medicine away so he couldn't be fixed.
Yeah. And was basically telling John Jr., hey, don't even try to save your father because he's going to die. Like, I got him this time.
I don't know, man. I don't know. Seems a little suspicious. I feel like I've heard this excuse before. Wasn't me, a witch did it.
That leads me to the next point. So it was, as best as it could have been in 1820, somewhat investigated and went to court. And this is where Tennessee became the first state to contribute the death of an individual to the supernatural, because even the court was like, yep, Bell Witch.
Ghost did it.
Yeah, ghost did it.
First or only?
I think first and only.
All right. Well, I would have expected more from Tennessee, so that's surprising. So that's it. Open and shut.
Pretty well as far as the state of Tennessee was concerned. Yep.
Bang the gavel, Judge. Ghost did it. Everybody go home. Did they try hanging her? But they set up like an invisible wire and they just like, woo, woo.
Like an invisible fire. Like, we're just gonna burn the witch. Well, the Bell Witch in the spring of 1821 told the family that it would be back in 7 years. which Lucy and 2 of her children reported that it did come back in much of the same way that it had before, as far as strange noises and all of that. But shortly after it returned, it left again, claiming that it would haunt the Bell family descendants again in 1935. And while some people report strange happenings still on the family land, it's never been to the same severity as what the original Bells reported in the 1800s. Today, you can tour a replica of their cabin, and you can also tour the caves. And the caves is where people believe the Bell Witch may have retreated to during the times that it said it was leaving and it would be back or whatever. And so you can tour the Bell Witch caves that are on the old Bell property.
Right. Because the life cycle, of course, was Bat and then Bat Yodi and then Witch. So she was returning home to her birthplace, the caves where the bats are born, I assume.
Right.
Right. That all checks out. I have no questions.
Yeah. She came, she murdered a man, she left.
As one does. Thank you guys for listening and happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Thanks, guys.
Cassie and Caitlin, the hosts of PNW Haunts and Homicides, descend deep into the unknown to bring tales of murder, the ghastly, and the otherworldly. Their stories will reveal hidden horrors of the past and show us how the darkness waits to ensnare the curious wanderer. They'll also have you questioning every rustle in the leaves and every creak from the forest.
Hi, Cassie.
Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, creepy people.
Hello.
Hello.
This is PNW Haunts and Homicides.
Can you imagine what it would be like if the frivolity of your youth, presuming that you were permitted any, was cut short by a horrific event? For more than one family, that sentiment is all too real. Emmanuel Fair was imprisoned in King County, Washington, for nearly a decade for a crime that he says he did not commit. He told the Seattle Times about being incarcerated for so long without a conviction. I always knew I was going to get out. I just didn't think it would take as long as it took.
10 years, you said?
That he was in prison, yes. At the Valley View Apartments near Lake Sammamish, #Never Bundy.
Ew.
If you know, you know. Ick yick and all that. Emmanuel was one of dozens of people, both other residents of the complex, as well as their guests, that were in and out of one of several apartment units during the Halloween party that took place nearly 15 years ago.
Okay, can I just say that that sounds like a lot of fun?
Yeah.
Like a whole apartment building party.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
I think it sounds fantastic.
Reminds me like a dorm kind of situation.
I think it very much had that kind of a vibe because it seems like there were a lot of people that were in their, early to mid 20s. So maybe recent college grads or, people kind of getting their lives started up. So great.
Aww.
The gravity of the situation didn't really hit until later, though, when a young woman's body was discovered in her very own bedroom. Arpana was a 24-year-old immigrant who worked as a software engineer at a company called EMC in Bellevue. And though she lived less than a dozen miles from her workplace, she had been born nearly a world away from the state of Washington in Hyderabad, India.
That's a whole world away?
I mean, yeah, basically.
I feel like it's in the same world.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying, though. It is probably a whole different world.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And most of her family was still there. She was an alum of Rutgers University, but her accolades didn't stop there because I'm pretty sure just getting into Rutgers is an accomplishment in and of itself. She had won an international software award and was a rising star in her Bellevue workplace.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. She was an active and friendly, outgoing young woman, but she also had an eye for promising volunteer opportunities, such as those that she took on both at an animal shelter, as well as with a local fire department.
Aw, well, isn't she the sweetest?
I know. She'd lived in the area for less than a year and signed up to volunteer her time to both in the Redmond area.
Oh, I know that area.
Yeah. Nearly 2 years later, in October 2010, Emmanuel was placed in a Seattle holding cell for the 2008 sexual assault and murder of Arpana Shinaka. At the time, they were continuing to gather evidence against him. For reference, DNA found at the scene of the crime would be linked to 3 men in total, but only one would ultimately be charged in connection with her death.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
So they ran a test on the DNA and it matched 3 different people?
There were a number of samples taken from various items in the apartment and that were discovered in another area. And we're going to talk about that in a second.
Okay.
But some of the samples matched one guy, some of the samples matched another. There may have been some commingling of samples.
Whoa.
Yeah.
We don't like commingling of samples.
Don't love that.
It's not a good time.
No. The evidence used against him was collected from a dumpster on the complex property. According to prosecutors, Emmanuel's DNA was discovered on multiple items that they believed the killer touched, including tape in the apartment, mixed with Arpana's bloodstains on a red robe found in a dumpster.
Oh.
Also, on a swab taken from Arpana's neck.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we've got some different places where it's being found, but we're going to come back. Put a pin in the DNA evidence for our full-length episode in the PNW Haunts and Homicides podcast feed, because we're going to get to her.
I'll be there.
Okay. When Arpana's body was found in her apartment back in 2008, a few specific sensory details stood out to those working the case. The smell of bleach, for one, but also how her bedroom seemed to be completely saturated with an oily substance, which was later determined to be motor oil.
Oh, ew.
Yeah.
Okay, I imagine that's very smelly, bleach and motor oil.
Mm-hmm. And what the fuck is going on with motor oil? I had a lot of questions.
Maybe, did they think it was flammable and they wanted to torch the place?
What I thought. Which would also later explain the burn marks on her bedroom carpet, as well as the satin sheets pulled from the garbage dumpster. Absolutely horrifying.
They were burned? Not chemical burns, like fire burns.
That's my understanding.
Ooh.
Yeah, because they say burn marks. The way that it's phrased in the source material, it does sound like fire burns, not ooh, ouch, that's going to blister.
Yeah.
In a weird chemical way.
But I guess they probably wouldn't say chemical burn if it wasn't on a person, I would assume.
Neighboring tenants would also say that they heard what they described as muffled moaning, but didn't indicate that they had any reason to be particularly concerned about the noise, at least on that night.
It does sound like a party house, so I'm sure noise is common.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Halloween party.
Right.
I feel like enough said. You know what I mean? Except maybe not. However, it wouldn't take long for serious concern to develop. By November 2nd, Arpana's family had not spoken to her for a couple of days. This was extremely unusual, as they typically spoke to her every day, daily, prompting her father to ask a family friend that lived in the area to check in on her. Whether they expected anything was truly wrong or just wanted to check on her in an abundance of caution, the scene that the family friend, along with one of Arpana's neighbors, walked into was the absolute worst case scenario imaginable.
Oh.
Unimaginable, but...
And you said her family isn't local, right?
Right.
Oh, gosh.
They found Arpana at the foot of her bed. Her autopsy would later show that she died of asphyxia by ligature strangulation.
No.
Ligature strangulation occurs when an external object is placed around the neck and provides compression.
Oh, God.
The compression is usually applied to the neck by using the decedent's own body weight in what would generally be described as either a partial or complete hanging.
Oh, my God. That sounds violent.
Yes. Her manner of death was obviously brutal, but within the report, it was also noted that she had sustained multiple blunt force injuries. Prior to leaving the scene, the killer or killers had used bleach, blue toilet bowl cleaner, a common household type of soap, and motor oil to strip away forensic evidence linking them to the crime.
Man.
Traces of the various cleansers were found on Arpana's body, the carpet, her comforter, the bathtub, as well as the bathroom counter and her mattress from which the comforter had been removed. Now, it's important to note that depending on who you ask, Arpana's killer was already imprisoned, but has since been released. Others believe that one of the other persons of interest is the likely killer, or even that a combination of multiple killers is most likely. Some have even speculated about other high-profile violent maniacs, such as Israel Keyes, and he's not the only one.
Ooh.
Usually that's a theory that could be easily dismissed, especially if we're not sure that it's coming from an entirely reliable source. However, in this case, it does seem that Israel Keyes was in fact in the Seattle area between October 31st and November 2nd.
Oh, that makes me really uncomfortable.
As it should. So while it may be far-fetched, it's possible that you may not want to rule that one out entirely.
Okay.
Emmanuel Fair's trial would begin in February of 2017, more than 6 years after he had originally been charged, and more than 8 years after Arpana was murdered. For the rest of the story and this episode's tarot reading, you'll have to join us on our regular feed.
Well, I'm not really that interested in hearing the rest of the details, but I'm really interested in the tarot.
Yeah.
That's what I'm here for.
I know. To everyone listening,
have a creepy ass Halloween.
Finally, we turn to Jamie and John from True Crime Cast. As we huddle close to the fire, they share tales of both visible and invisible terrors, of voices that invade your very soul, that lead us into the heart of terror. Listen closely, and your heart will race with each whispered word.
Hey, True Crime Cast fans, Jamie and John here, super excited to be a part of this Halloween collaboration. When Darkness Falls, we were excited to be contacted by Allison from Coffee and Cases, and we've got our own spooky little tale to tell here today. So get us rolling, John.
We are going to be talking about Teresita Baza, who was born in 1929 in the Philippines and was the only child to her parents who were well off and very wealthy. She went to college there and then moved to the United States in 1960 to earn her master's degree in music. However, she would become a respiratory therapist at Edgewater Hospital located just outside of Chicago. Fun fact, this was the same hospital that was the birthplace of both John Wayne Gacy and Hillary Clinton.
What a club. Teresita was a kind, hardworking lady and lived a simple life in which she kept to herself. She wasn't the type of person to make enemies or make anybody angry. On February 21st, Teresita worked a normal day, and then at 7 that evening, she got a phone call from a friend who was a doctor at Edgewater Hospital. They spoke about concert tickets and trying to sell some. They were on the phone until about 7:20, and she said a friend arrived and she had to go. She got another call at 7:30. This was from Ruth Moab, who also worked at the hospital, and they talked for about 20 minutes, and Teresita stated that she had to run because somebody was there to fix her television.
At 8:40 p.m., neighbors in their apartments smelled smoke in their units, and they opened the doors and saw smoke coming from Teresita's apartment. When firefighters got there, they found the source of the flames was a mattress that had caught on fire. When they had put out the fire, they found Teresita's body under the mattress, laying down with her hands over her head. She was in just a horrible situation, and it very much seemed as if foul play was involved.
Because Teresita lived alone, police weren't able to find out if anything was missing from the home. Was this a burglary? Was this personal? Was this a sexual assault? Later on, we would find out that there was no sexual assault. But so many questions. Police did find a note that said, get tickets for AS being initials. Police didn't know who had come to repair the TV because Teresita hadn't told anybody a name or a company of anybody that was supposed to be coming to the house. So all police know is we have this note, we have these phone calls, and we have somebody fixing her TV, and that's all they got.
This case would basically go nowhere for months. However, in August of 1977, 6 months after the murder, police would receive a fairly strange tip. Another department around Chicago, Evanstown, called the CPD to ask if they had looked into a man named Alan Showery, who also worked at Edgewater Hospital. The police department had not looked into this man, and of course they wanted to know why they were even asking, and Evansville Police Department gave them the name of Dr. Jose Shao as someone that they could call and speak with, and that's when the story gets really spooky.
Yeah, Dr. Shao's wife, whose name was Remy, also worked at the Edgewater Hospital. Dr. Shao worked elsewhere. So detectives went to their home to learn why they would even ask about Alan Showery and what connection they had to Teresita. They seemed shy or kind of ashamed almost at first, didn't really want to talk. But during the home visit, Dr. Shao asked one of the detectives if he believed in the occult and demonic forces. That's got to be a question as a police officer. You're there to get a report and get some facts. That's got to put you on your heels, I would think.
Right.
Dr. Shao said that he's a physician, but he had seen some things in his life that science just would not explain. He went on to say that he didn't know Teresita or even know about her murder until one night when his wife, Remy, had become possessed by the spirit of Teresita Basa.
Dr. Shao stated that the first time he saw this was in their home. Remy had got up from the couch, walked into her bedroom, and was just sitting there on the bed, staring with a blank face. He asked her if she was okay, and she began speaking in a foreign language. This language was Tagalog, and her voice was not his wife's. Now, Tagalog was a national language of the Philippines where Teresita and Remy are from. Obviously, Dr. Shao was concerned for his wife, and just like a doctor, he wanted to make sure that she was oriented. So he asked her if she knew who she was. And the voice said, "I am Teresita Basa." The voice told him that she needed help solving her murder and that the man who murdered her was Alan Showery. The voice explained that Alan showed up to work on the TV, but instead she was stabbed by Alan.
Dr. Shao then said that once the voice left, Remy was back and had no memory of this experience. When Dr. Shao asked Remy if she knew Teresita, she said that they may have met once during orientation at work, but they worked different shifts and really didn't know each other. They certainly weren't friends. He stated that another time it happened in the middle of the night while Remy was asleep. The voice woke her up and asked why he hadn't gone to the police yet. Dr. Shao said, "I'm a scientist. I need proof of this before I go to police." The voice then described 2 pieces of jewelry that had been stolen from Teresita's house by Alan the night of her murder. He went on to give those to his girlfriend. The voice also told Dr. Shao the names of relatives of Teresita who could identify the jewelry as hers. Remy told the police that sometimes in the hospital locker room, she would look around and see visions of Teresita with Alan's face behind her. So all kinds of supernatural imagery and claims of voices, not our typical leads.
They asked some of his coworkers about Alan and Teresita, And one of them had mentioned that he remembered Alan saying that he was going to work on her TV at some point. With this and the note from her home and about having tickets to give to AS, police paid him a visit as well as his girlfriend. And at first, he said he didn't know her. But when confronted with the testimony about working on her TV, his story began to change. He stated that he had went there for just a short time, but didn't have the right tool that he needed to fix the TV, so he left fairly quickly. They asked his girlfriend if she had been given any jewelry, and she showed them 2 pieces that were a perfect match to the ones that were described from the ghost, and she stated that he had given them to her in January as a late Christmas gift. Police showed these pieces of jewelry to Teresita's family, and they confirmed that they were indeed Teresita's.
You mentioned you got chills when you quoted the quote-unquote ghost earlier. I just got chills that the jewelry claim was right. How on earth could Remy have known about this other than this being possessed as she claimed to be? Eventually, Alan would confess when he was confronted with all this evidence. He said he got there that night and he killed her looking for money. He only found $30 and he took 2 pieces of jewelry. So that's what her life was worth to him. He was charged with murder, and this trial in the public was nicknamed The Voice from the Grave. 4 weeks later, there was a hung jury because of the ghost witness. A lot of the jurors, while they thought he probably did this, were so hung up on the unlikelihood of Remy knowing this from a ghost that they couldn't commit to a guilty verdict. But before there could be another trial, Alan pled guilty for a shorter sentence of 14 years for murder. And after everything was said and done, he only ended up serving 4 years before he was released.
That's the most insane part of this story. And I know that I just said a ghost told somebody who murdered her, but the fact that he only got 4 years for this is mind-blowing to me.
It is. And yeah, I mean, who's to say how she had this information? I can't think of a logical scenario where she knew this unless somebody around the hospital was talking about it. I guess that's possible. But I think that's the story you go to police with, not the story of she was possessed by a ghost of a dead person that woke me up in the middle of the night. They were reliable witnesses. Everything they said proved to be true, though, so it is what it is.
Yeah, I legitimately think that the ghost of Teresita helped solve her own murder, and that we as society and the justice system were the ones that dropped the ball.
Again, we're thrilled to be a part of this When Darkness Falls collaboration. You can find True Crime Cast anywhere you find your favorite podcasts with new episodes every Tuesday and Friday.
Until next crime, this has been True Crime Cast.
And happy Halloween.
We look at each other and we know what we must do. We must listen to their stories. We must learn about the darkness that lurks in the world, both inside and out, because that is the only way to escape it. Be sure to subscribe to all 13 participating podcasts listed in our show notes so you don't miss a single episode or tale of terror. And again, listener, remember, when darkness calls, answer at your own peril.
Thanks again for listening to True Crime by Indie Drop-In Network. If you would like to nominate a true crime podcast to be featured, just send me a tweet at Indie Drop-In. I'd also love to hear if one of our featured podcasts is now your favorite show. Indie Drop-In survives off ad revenue and listener donations. If you would like to contribute, please consider buying me a coffee. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/Indie Drop-In. If you look at the very bottom of the episode description, I put a link in there to make it really easy. Indie Drop-In has many other shows that you also might like. Just go to indiedropin.com. All right, see you next week.